currently Earth.
April 28th, 1789. 3 weeks into a journey from Tahiti to the West Indies, the HMS Bounty is seized in a mutiny led by Fletcher Christian, the master's mate. Captain William Bligh and 18 of his loyal supporters were set adrift in a small open boat, and the Bounty set course for Tubai, south of Tahiti. I hope I said that right. Yeah, Tubai. It's probably Tubai. All right. In December of 1787, the Bounty left England for Tahiti in the South Pacific, where it was to collect a cargo of breadfruit saplings to transport to the West Indies. There, the breadfruit would serve as food for enslaved passengers. After a 10-month journey, the Bounty arrived in Tahiti in October of 1788 and remained there for more than 5 months. On Tahiti, the crew enjoyed an idyllic life, reveling in the comfortable climate, lush surroundings, and the hospitality of the Tahitians. Or should I say Tahitians? Fletcher Christian fell in love with a Tahitian woman named Mawatua. On April 4th, 1789, the Bounty departed Tahiti with its store of breadfruit saplings. On April 28th, near the island of Tonga, Christian and 25 petty officers and seamen seized the ship. Bligh, who eventually would fall prey to the total of 3 mutinies in his career, was an oppressive commander and insulted those under him. By setting him adrift in an overcrowded 23-foot-long boat in the middle of the Pacific, Christian and his conspirators had apparently handed him a death sentence. By remarkable seamanship, however, Bligh and his men reached Timor in the East Indies on June 14th, 1789, after a voyage of about 3,600 miles. Bligh returned to England and soon sailed again to Tahiti, from where he successfully transported breadfruit trees to the West Indies. Meanwhile, Christian and his men attempted to establish themselves on the island of Tubai. Unsuccessful. Let me make sure that's Tubai, and it's Tahitians. Hold on. It's pronounced Tubai. Tubai. Unsuccessful in their colonizing effort, the Bounty sailed north to Tahiti, and 16 crewmen decided to stay there, despite the risk of capture by British authorities. Christian and 8 others, together with 6 Tahitian men, a dozen Tahitian women, and a child, decided to search the South Pacific for a safe haven. In January of 1790, the Bounty settled on Pitcairn Island, an isolated and uninhabited volcanic island more than 1,000 miles east of Tahiti. The mutineers who remained on Tahiti were captured and taken back to England, where 3 were hanged and continued their eternity. A British ship searched for Christian and the others, but did not find them. In 1808, an American whaling vessel was drawn to Pitcairn by smoke from a cooking fire. The Americans discovered a community of children and women led by John Adams, the sole survivor of the original 9 mutineers. According to Adams, after settling on Pitcairn, the colonists had stripped and burned the Bounty, and internal strife and sickness had led to the continuance of eternity of Fletcher and all the men with him. In 1825, a British ship arrived and formally granted Adams amnesty, and he served as patriarch of the Pitcairn community until his continuance of eternity in 1829. In 1831, the Pitcairn Islanders were resettled on Tahiti, but unsatisfied with life there, they soon returned to their native island. In 1838, the Pitcairn Islands, which includes 3 nearby uninhabited islands, was incorporated into the British Empire. In 1855, the Pitcairn's population had grown to nearly 200, and the 2-square-mile island could not sustain its residents. In 1856, the islanders were moved to Norfolk Island, a former penal colony, nearly 4,000 miles to the west. However, less than 2 years later, 17 of the islanders returned to Pitcairn, followed by more families in 1864. Today, just a few dozen live on Pitcairn Island, and all but a handful are descendants of the Bounty mutineers. About 1,000 residents of Norfolk Island, half its population, trace their lineage from Fletcher Christian and 8 other British sailors. It was April 28th in the year 1967 that boxing champion Muhammad Ali refuses to be inducted into the U.S. Army and is immediately stripped of his heavyweight title. Ali, a Muslim, cited religious reasons for his decision to forego military service. Born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. in Louisville, Kentucky, on January 14th in 1942, the future three-time world champ changed his name to Muhammad Ali in 1964 after converting to Islam. He scored a gold medal at the 1960 Olympic Games in Rome and made his professional boxing debut against Tony Hunsaker on October 29th in 1960, winning the bout in 6 rounds. On February 25th in 1964, he defeated the heavily favored bruiser Sonny Liston in 6 rounds to become the heavyweight champ. On April 28th in 1967, with the U.S. at war with Vietnam, Ali refused to be inducted into the armed forces, saying, "I ain't got no quarrel with those Viet Cong." On June 20th in 1967, Ali was convicted of draft evasion, sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined $10,000 and banned from boxing for 3 years. He stayed out of prison as his case was appealed and returned to the ring on October 26th in 1970, knocking out Jerry Quarry in Atlanta in the 3rd round. On March 8th in 1971, Ali fought Joe Frazier in the fight of the century and lost after 15 rounds, the first loss of his professional boxing career. On June 28th of that same year, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned his conviction for evading the draft. At a January 24th, 1974 rematch at New York City's Madison Square Garden, Ali defeated Frazier by decision in 12 rounds. On October 30th of that same year, an underdog Ali bested George Foreman and reclaimed his heavyweight champion belt at the hugely hyped Rumble in the Jungle in Kinshasa, Zaire, with a knockout in the 8th round. On October 1st in 1975, Ali met Joe Frazier for a 3rd time at the Thrilla in Manila in the Philippines and defeated him in 14 rounds. On February 15th in 1978, Ali lost the title to Leon Spinks in a 15-round split decision. However, 7 months later, on September 15, Ali won it back. In June of 1979, Muhammad Ali announced he was retiring from boxing. He returned to the ring on October 2nd in 1980 and fought heavyweight champion Larry Holmes, who knocked him out in the 11th round. After losing to Trevor Berbick on December 11th in 1981, Ali left the ring for the final time with a 56-5 record. He's the only fighter to be heavyweight champion 3 times. In 1984, it was revealed Ali had Parkinson's disease. He continued his eternity on June 3rd in 2016. It was April 28th in the year 1969 that Charles de Gaulle resigned as leader of France. Following the defeat of his proposals for constitutional reform in a national referendum, Charles de Gaulle resigns as president of France. A veteran of World War I, de Gaulle unsuccessfully petitioned his country to modernize its armed forces between the wars. After Henri Pétain and other French leaders signed an armistice with Nazi Germany in June of 1940, he fled to London, where he organized the Free French Forces and rallied French colonies to the Allied cause. His forces fought unsuccessfully in North Africa, and in June of 1944, he was named head of the French government in exile. On August 26th, following the Allied invasion of France, de Gaulle entered Paris in triumph. 3 months later, he was unanimously elected provisional president of France. He resigned in January of 1946, however, claiming he lacked sufficient governing power. De Gaulle formed a new political party that had only moderate electoral successes. And in 1953, he retired. However, 5 years later, a military and civilian revolt in Algeria created a political crisis in France, and he was called out of retirement to lead the nation. A new constitution was passed, and in late December, he was elected president of the Fifth Republic. During the next decade, President de Gaulle granted independence to Algeria and attempted to restore France to its former international stature by withdrawing from the U.S.-dominated NATO alliance and promoting the development of French atomic weapons. However, student demonstrations and worker strikes in 1968 eroded his popular support, and in 1969, his proposals for further constitutional reform were defeated in a national vote. On April 28th in 1969, Charles de Gaulle, 79 years old, retired for good. He continued his eternity the following year.
The information documented on this audio file can be verified on History.com.